My son, 47 male, and his ex-partner, Elena, 45 female, were together 18 years before they broke up 2 years ago. They have two 20-year-old twin daughters and a younger daughter that is 18 years old. They were living together, but my son said he didn't want to get married, and Elena seemed to be okay with that. However, when Elena fell pregnant at 43, she told my son that she really wanted to get married and finally call each other husband and wife. She confessed that to my mother, Catherine. My mother, Catherine, was very close to Elena and her family and told her even if they didn't get married, she wanted Elena to have the family engagement ring and gave it to her. As the reality of Elena's pregnancy set in, my son started going crazy. He started blaming my wife and I for suggesting he go on a date with Elena all those years ago and said that we all had forced her on him and that this relationship has been a sham. 3 months into her pregnancy, Elena lost the baby and my son moved out. In the ensuing battle where my son used the courts to force the sale of their house, my mother essentially disowned her grandson. She died a year later from cancer, and on her deathbed, she said she still doesn't forgive my son. 6 months after my son left Elena, he married Victoria, now 24. Victoria got pregnant in early February and just gave birth to their son Adam. My son was very excited for Adam's arrival and bought his wife customized jewelry, her favorite perfume as gifts for being a new mom. However, Victoria said what she really wanted was the family engagement ring because it was passed down to the women in their extended family. My son calls me and says it would mean everything if I convinced Elena to give it back. He said Elena shouldn't have it because she's not legally part of the family. When I said that Elena missed Catherine as they were close, my son exploded and said, "Take legal action if you must. Get it back." He said Elena was only on reasonable speaking terms to me, but if I didn't tell her that the ring needed to come back to the family. I'm still close to Elena, so I told her what my son was saying. She started crying and saying that it fills her with such anguish because she loved Catherine and her own family didn't have any keepsakes. She said that she loves me like a father, and if I really ask for it back, she won't fight me for it, but that she believes that this ring has more meaning to her than Victoria. When I told my son this, he said Victoria was disappointed, and that I say I don't judge Victoria or prefer Elena over her, but my actions speak otherwise. He has threatened to not let me see my grandson unless I go ask again for the ring back. What do I do? Do I go back and break Elena's heart as my son says a father would and do it so I can see my grandson? Or do I not begrudge Elena this memory? I fear that my son will actually take Elena to court over this, or that he'll ask his 3 grown kids to ask their mom to hand it over. But his daughters have always resorted to shouting when they felt their mom was being attacked, and even yell at me because they say I spend too much time with Victoria. I also feel guilty because my son constantly says he stayed with Elena from his mid-20s onward to please his parents and his friend group. I also want my grandson to be a part of my life. My son, 40, and his ex-girlfriend, 41, were together for 13 years, but were never married. Nevertheless, they lived together for 11 years and have 3 kids, 11 female, 8 female, and 3 female, together, and I mostly refer to her as my daughter-in-law. Around July of this year, I was shocked to hear from my son that he wasn't happy in his relationship and was moving out. They both refused to tell me the exact reasons behind the split, but I knew that my son's ex-girlfriend was devastated by it. I would go over to her home to help with the kids while she applied for full-time work. I told her she'll always be family. Then around September, my son started living with a new woman, 23. He asked me to please not judge him, and I told him he was a grown adult and I couldn't tell him what to do, and as a parent, I'd always love him. I advised he not introduce her to his kids. In late October, however, he shocked us again when he proposed to his new girlfriend and set a date to get married in a civil ceremony close to Valentine's Day, 2021. He had told me for more than a decade that he wasn't a fan of marriage, and that if he and his girlfriend could survive him working 80-hour weeks and the stress beginning a finance career entailed, they didn't need a piece of paper. His ex-girlfriend had previously been reluctant to finalize any sort of custody agreement, saying they'd been together for 13 years and she had hoped he'd realize what he had lost and they'd work things out. She understandably became furious and started being aggressive in terms of getting custody of the kids. She was also angry that he introduced her to the kids a few times. However, in mid-November, they said that they were going to stop fighting for the sake of the kids and keep up the decade-long family tradition of celebrating Thanksgiving at my house. My wife died a few years back, so it's just me doing everything. His fiancée had previously said that she was going to be driving to her sister's house an hour away to have Thanksgiving with her. However, my son called me yesterday to say that her sister had to work on Thanksgiving now, and he didn't want his fiancée to be alone, so to set a place for her at the table. I called my son's ex to inform her because my son asked me to and didn't want her breaking down in tears when she saw his fiancée, as she does when they meet unexpectedly. She said she would not stand for it, and that she wasn't family to their daughters and she wasn't doing this with the new fiancé during the holidays, at least until he actually married the fiancée. She then said that if I did not uninvite my son's new fiancée, who she said ruined their daughter's stable family and has only been there for a couple months, while she's been there for 13 years, that she and the girls would eat Thanksgiving dinner at her home. My son said that his ex was being unreasonable and that everybody has somebody to celebrate Thanksgiving with, and his fiancée has nobody, and that wasn't right. He said that I told him I'd love him for all his decisions, and that includes his fiancée because they were getting married whether I liked it or not. What do I do? My son is saying that he should get priority as my child, but my son's ex is saying that the tension with the new fiancée and the fact that she's still very much a stranger would confuse and hurt their girls. So I, 16, moved in with my aunt at 15 because my parents remarried and had new families. My father married his mistress, who already had a son, and now they have a baby daughter. My mom remarried my stepdad, and they had my half-sister. After all that, I became a secondary character in their life, and they looked forward to shipping me off to the other home so they could pretend that I didn't exist and play happy family. After a year, I became fed up and started sleeping over more and more at other houses, and when home, I would never interact with anyone. Both my parents took that as a rebellious phase and would fight with me all the time. I wasn't a bad kid or a troublemaker, but soon I was labeled as the black sheep of the family. Every interaction with my parents became a lecture about my attitude problem and how well the other kids behaved. I was just so fed up that I packed my stuff and disappeared for a few days. I took a bus and went MIA for 4 days. Of course, the police were called, and when I appeared again, I hit another lecture. We got in a screaming match where they called me a disappointment, and I told them I hated them. I called my aunt crying and she came to fetch me. In the car, I could hear how she was tearing my parents a new one. Neither of them tried to convince me of coming back home. We informed the respective authorities about my changed living conditions, and my aunt is my current guardian. My parents' ways half-assed our contract, appearing only when it was convenient, sometimes giving me money, etc. Recently, they tried to build more contact up, but I was not interested. I won a story writing contest and didn't tell them, nor did I invite them to the celebration. And on the website where you can read my story, and thanks goes to my aunt for loving me unconditionally, I didn't invite my parents to my Sweet 16 party. Basically, I have cut them out of my life. I am not interested in their lives or families or anything. Mom tried to meet up for my birthday, but we didn't. She got upset and called me crying, and I just didn't care. It was like listening to a TV character cry. It wasn't important. She isn't important to me anymore. Dad called and said he was worried about me and how my reaction is not healthy, and again, I didn't care. As far as I am concerned, my aunt is my only parent. She encourages that I build up my relationship to my parents again, but doesn't force me. Anyway, yesterday my parents pulled me out of school and invited me to eat at our old favorite place. Mom had tears in her eyes, and even Dad seemed hurt. They tried apologizing for their behavior and pleaded with me to come back, and I just said no and left. I still resent them for choosing a new life over me, but I don't know if I am being a petty a-hole or what to do now. I don't want them in my life, but would I be making the right choice? I don't know. Edit. Because people think I just made it up and I am a moody teen. You know when you are at a friend's house where their parents don't particularly like you and you feel tense all the time and you feel like you shouldn't be there? That was the feeling I constantly had at their houses. I know that my stepfather doesn't like me that much. My parents both would fight about who keeps me longer. But not in the sense I want to have her longer, but I took her last weekend, it's your turn. Also, planning fun activities for the day after I leave. My father and his wife would often schedule visits to the parks or bigger trips specifically to the weeks my mother had me, and my mother and her husband would leave me alone at home so they could go out with the baby. Every chance they got, they would ship me to my grandma's or my aunt's place with some excuse and then do family stuff. Also, when you went through the houses, there were barely any pictures of me. They had big-ass portraits of my siblings in them together, but almost none of mine. They shipped me off to my grandma's and grandpa's for a whole summer and only called twice. When there were family functions, I am often excluded. Example, my dad had a family barbecue and didn't invite me. They forgot my birthday on more than one occasion, and when they remembered, they got me a $10 Starbucks gift card, even when they know I don't like Starbucks. So they never straight up said it, but they didn't hide it either. It's been about 2 months since the post about my parents. Turns out, they are still selfish a-holes. They didn't want me in their lives because they suddenly felt remorse and guilt, but because my half-sister has health complications and needs a transplant, and apparently, I am not sure about this, I am the only match, which is wild because I have not been tested. Can they just see that from my medical records? I'll visit my half-sister more and try to build a relationship with her, but I am done with my parents. My aunt has also given up on my parents, and we are currently looking into legal adoption. I, 27 male, don't have any siblings, but I have a cousin, Kevin, who's 2 years younger than me, and we literally grew up together. I spent a lot of time with my dad's side of the family. Mom is deceased, Dad never remarried, he has health issues, and I was there with Kevin most of the time. We did everything together. Fought, played, cried, laughed together. I've always been very close to my grandparents as well, so I was very comfortable being there. When I was engaged to my ex-fiancée, I used to bring her over to my grandparents' house most of the time. Her, me, and Kevin would spend our time doing things together. I noticed Kevin would try to take part even in personal conversations and try to tag along whenever we went out for dinner. I set some boundaries, but he just kept stomping over them. He changed. He tried to pick fights with me and claim I'm forgetting about him and prioritizing my ex over him. I didn't know how to deal with this, so I kept my distance. In about 2 months, I found from my aunt about Kevin constantly meeting up with my ex, and she told me she was worried something was going on between Kevin and my ex-fiancée, and she was right. Turned out, my ex and Kevin got together, and I was being kept in the dark while I was planning our wedding and handing out invitations. I felt like an absolute idiot. I couldn't handle my anger. I stopped everything and cut contact with Kevin and the family, except Dad because he needed me. It's been over a year now. I heard that Kevin was in and out of the hospital, but I didn't know why. Until my aunt reached out to me telling me that Kevin has liver cancer and wasn't handling it well. I drove my dad to visit him once and saw my ex, who's now his girlfriend, there, and I left right away. I kept my distance, and recently I started getting calls from family members asking, "Did you hear about Kevin?" and telling me the same story. My grandmother called me wanting to arrange for a family dinner on Christmas and because Kevin got out of the hospital, and wanted me to come, hoping to solve my issues with him, seeing that I may not be able to do it later. But I refused. She told me I needed to have some empathy and let go of the past because what happened to him was enough for me to let it go. They started pressuring me from all sides. I told my grandparents that I won't sit with my ex-fiancée and the person who wronged me at the same table and pretend to be a happy family. They replied that I was resentful, that he's my cousin no matter what happens. It's the same people who allowed my ex into their house after what she did and sided with Kevin and said they only allowed my ex into the house for Kevin's sake, and now demand that I get right with him because clearly he deserves more sympathy than I do. I'm deeply hurt, and I can't imagine sitting at the same table with the people who hurt me the most. What should I do at this point? I think everyone is being unfair and refusing or just ignoring what Kevin did to me.